He's that guy, you know. He's that guy in that show. That guy in that show.
Oh, yeah. That guy in that show. This week's That Guy in That Show is William Smith.
Awesome. I love William Smith.
It's weird because, a while ago we talk after the show or before the show, and you casually mentioned, oh, do you know this actor named William Smith? And I go, well, yeah, I do, and I had a chance to run into him at a convention, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it was weird that there's some actors that we both have a mutual appreciation for, and we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we did a segment where we kind of shone a spotlight on these particular actors? And I can't wait to dive into this. Professor, you've got some things you really appreciate William Smith in. So do I. What can you tell us about William Smith?
Well, let's just hit a couple of things about his personal life. He spoke many languages. He spoke French, Russian, German, and more. And he was actually even going to go into the CIA, but he got a job, I think a contract and acting job with MGM. And one thing that I had no idea, he was in Ghost of Frankenstein as a child. He was a village boy in the courtroom. I had no idea. I didn't realize that. He was a two-time arm wrestling world champion, and he was able to reverse curl 163 pounds. That is, I don't know. I mean, he was a big, strong-looking guy. I don't know that. 163 pounds, Jiminy Cricket. Reverse curling. That's a lot of weight. He was a boxer. He was a car racer. What most people would probably remember him by is, he was Conan's dad in Conan the Barbarian. Remember talking about steel? Do you remember that, Chris?
Yes.
He was just saying, oh, steel will never let you down. The sword is key, and big influence on Conan. My first kind of realization that, this guy's a really, really powerful actor was in the 70s TV miniseries Rich Man, Poor Man, where he played Anthony Falconetti, who was the bad guy. And he was a really, really bad guy. And here's something I wanted to talk a little bit about with you, Chris. William Smith was in an excellent Kolchak episode. What was it? The Energy Eater? Was that one?
Yes, the Energy Eater. Mm-hmm.
He played a Native American kind of son or grandson of a medicine man or a spirit healer guy. And so he had, some, Native American powers and understanding. And it turned out that was just what was needed for Kolchak to figure out what was going on in this hospital. Smith played a really charismatic ladies' man who was kind of a big, a construction worker guy, and he was always on the make. Every time there was a female on the screen, he was like, "Oh, here we go," and they seemed to, to be very pleased about it. So I really, really dug that, and he was also in a couple of other MeTV shows people might know. He was in Batman, Minerva Mayhem, and Millionaires, the one with Zsa Zsa Gabor. And I thought he was awesome in the Buck Rogers episode, Buck's Duel to the Death. And that duel is with William Smith. Do you have any thoughts about any of those appearances, Chris?
Well, Professor, yeah, you mentioned Rich Man, Poor Man, of course. Kolchak, it was an interesting appearance because I think the monster's name was Machamito or something like that. And typically in a Kolchak episode, Carl is tasked with tracking down information, and he has to go to someone, and they provide on how to dispatch the monster.
Right.
And usually their on-screen time isn't a lot. It's maybe a couple of minutes or more depending on the episode. This one really gave a lot of things for William Smith to do. As you said, he was a ladies' man. He ran a construction company, and he's working with Carl in as much as this could benefit him in a way. And he does get a lot of screen time versus all the other characters that really don't get a lot to do with just passing off a few sentences to Carl on how to get rid of the monster.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the episode of Batman happened to be the very last episode of Batman that aired, where he played the henchman.
Yeah.
And it was unique that he got to play, a muscle-bound guy, wearing a tight white shirt and going after a season where there was also Batgirl in it as well. And there was a lot of, can you imagine just being on the set of Batman, just trying to, and did he know that this was the last episode that was going to air? Who knows? There was that. I think I was first conscious of William Smith as a who's this guy? He's a really good actor. Was in the Clint Eastwood movie Any Which Way You Can, was a sequel to Every Which Way But Loose.
Yep.
I believe this came out in 1980, and in the first movie, Eastwood plays a character named Philo Beddoe, who's this bare-fisted guy who, gets by, and he makes a couple extra bucks by doing these fights and everything, and his reputation grows, and he goes from town to town, and he sort of works his way out from the West Coast a little further east to, do his thing, as opposed to driving a truck.
Yeah.
Well, in the first movie, Clint Eastwood's character Philo Beddoe loses to a legend, and it sort of had a sad ending, because Eastwood kind of throws the fight because he doesn't want to lose to this legend that he looks up to named Tank Murdoch, and he's like, oh, this guy's gonna be the next Tank Murdoch, and Eastwood's struggling, does he lets Tank win, and is it because he didn't want this guy's reputation tarnished, or does he not want the weight of being a legend to kind of follow him around for now? So it really had an interesting ending and a sad ending. But in this one, Any Which Way You Can, we got to see a real neat dynamic between the two characters. In this one, Smith plays a character named Wilson, who's basically a muscle for the mob on the East Coast. And he's just very white collar about his job. He wears a suit. Philo wears a T-shirt. They train in similar ways, and they basically meet each other while jogging, and Eastwood saves him. They're in a bar, and when Eastwood's lady friend gets insulted, who's singing on stage, there's a scene where Eastwood is about to get stabbed, but Wilson, Smith's character, takes him out. And they sort of like, okay, you owe me now you owe me. And they just can't leave it square. They have a mutual respect for each other, despite their vast differently backgrounds and respect like this. Philo drives a pickup, Wilson's driving a Cadillac. Things come to a head with an epic fight in, of all places, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where they go and just have this fight that goes from indoors to outdoors, from a restaurant to the middle of a park. It just carries on. It starts in a barn and it keeps on going. The fight initially was going to be called off. Bets were going to be called off. There was mob money involved. There was a person. But these two guys just wanted to know who was the better man between the two. And I won't spoil it, but it was just an epic bare-fisted fight, and it was just one of the most memorable things that I saw, coming at it as a 12-year-old thinking, how cool was this, and everything like that. And I think this was almost at the peak of Smith's career, because just before the movie came out, he appeared on the last season of Hawaii Five-0. And you go, well, Chris, wait a minute, I don't remember Smith on Hawaii Five-0. There was Jack Lord as McGarrett and James MacArthur as Dano, but where was Smith? Well, in the very last season, I guess, I don't know if James MacArthur's contract expired or he was just tired of doing the show, but they had one more season of Hawaii Five-0 to do. And in some markets, I don't know if it came on the regular time. I remember seeing something, CBS would air these late at night after the series had ended, and they would call it just simply McGarrett, even though McGarrett had little, if anything, to do in the final season of Hawaii Five-0. In some of these episodes, they would basically leave it up to Smith's character, who came in from former former policeman in Boston, I believe. How he was introduced to the show. And Dano's absence is never explained. Basically, McGarrett has a new staff that he's working under, and Smith's character Kimo Karu is basically investigating a crooked politician from Boston. His family was killed, and he's sort of got a vengeance, and he wants to get after this mobster. And he does it in his own tactical way. And I think one of the mobsters also in that last season was Ross Martin, another fine character actor from the Wild Wild West. And there's some brilliant exchanges, and you could really see Smith's tough guy attitude. Now, it's weird because in Any Which Way You Can, Smith has a mustache, but as Kimo Karu, he's clean shaven. But he just exudes this confidence. He exudes this machismo. He just exudes this tough guy character. Good looking and just hard as nails. And you really, really see it. And I really came to appreciate the guy with his role as Wilson, and particularly his role on Hawaii Five-0, where he was asked to do a lot. McGarrett there was a few episodes where he really wouldn't do much. He sat behind a desk, and he was kind of like Steve Trevor and Lyle Wagner in the CBS seasons of Wonder Woman. McGarrett's role, Jack Lord's role, was kind of a little steadily diminishing, and I think he was getting up there in age, couldn't act. They saved the best for last, though, with Hawaii Five-0, with him getting well fat, but I digress. But yeah, I think the guy was really at his height of his powers and recognizability. Must have had a heck of an agent to get a lot of work right around that time. Yeah. But we mentioned this too, and going back, I remember one of my biggest convention regrets is having the opportunity to speak to Mr. Smith, and I just sort of passed on it. I had a chance to ask him a question. It was so depressing because this was a convention many, many years ago in the Chicago area, and Frank Gorshin was also slated to appear at the convention, but he canceled at the last minute, and Mr. Gorshin would pass away shortly thereafter. And I just can't remember what the circumstances were where I passed by his table. He might have been speaking to someone, and then I had another opportunity, and I said, well, do I go back? And it's one of those things when you go to a convention and you have an opportunity to speak to somebody who's come all this way to meet his fans, and you just pass it up. It was one of my hugest con regrets, if not the top one, just to talk to William Smith, who a wealth of knowledge. Just, I mean, what a Hollywood career, though, from bit parts to starring roles to things like that, and a few other things that I saw him in, was the Hawaii Five-0. But I remember one thing I haven't seen for years. I found out, looking at IMDb, he was in a movie called Cece and Company back in 1970 with Joe Namath, of all people. Wow. Where Namath was like at the height of his powers and stuff like that. And this was like, I don't know if anybody remembers Cece and Company, Professor, but this was sort of like a biker movie where Namath is sort of like... if you think of Brando in The Wild Bunch, or The Wild One, The Wild One.
Oh, yeah, The Wild
One. This is like, Namath was like this. He basically rides his motorcycle around town. He goes into a grocery store, opens milk to himself, and just basically makes a sandwich and leaves. That's the kind of guy he is, with that. I think Anne Margaret might have been in the movie, but, Namath at the height of his powers, just coming off the Super Bowl, they gave him this movie to star in as this rebel biker guy, and William Smith is in there as a guy. One of the last things I saw him in was, and I can't believe it wasn't as recent as I thought it was, but it was a movie called Hell to Pay, which was a Western, and it also had Stella Stevens. It had Buck Taylor, who was Newly from Gunsmoke, and it had Lee Majors, the $6 Million Man himself, and who was also in The Big Valley. And it was so nice to see all these character actors, Stella Stevens, Buck Taylor, Lee Majors, and William Smith, all in the movie. And the movie was called Hell to Pay, which was a 2005 Western. And I wish he got more to do, because I thought his role really, they didn't give him a lot. But whatever he appeared in, he gave his all. You could tell it was William Smith. He just had that persona, that aura about the guy who was just brought so much talent to the role, and charismatic, as you said, strong physical specimen of an actor, you say, and you could just really see that with the fights that he did with Eastwood in Any Which Way You Can. I can't think of anybody else, but it was just a marvelous role from him, from a Hollywood tough guy, and just something of a legend, just to have been there in the 60s, Hollywood in the 70s, Hollywood in the 80s, and just to see what a career and what a time he had during those decades where it was just peak Hollywood for movie, TV watching for me, and for him to be in all those roles. Marvelous stuff.
Yeah. And, you mentioned, he has a machismo about him. And it's interesting because, as a guy, sometimes those macho guys that are on, shows, they can kind of tick you off as a guy. It's like, that jerk. But he's just got so much charisma. As a guy, you look at this, macho lady killer, guy, and you're just like, he looks like he'd be fun to hang out with.
Yeah, and in Any Which Way You Can, I think he was basically set up to lose, because I think fans were disappointed that Clint Eastwood lost in the first movie. So, but his character Wilson was written in such a way that you really almost felt for Wilson in a sense, and they left being buddies and having mutual respect for each other, but you kind of felt for Wilson because
Awesome.
he was sort of coerced into doing this fight, but he didn't want to. He was his own man, and he had there was a lot of depth to the character. It was really interesting to see how they wrote it and how they played it out. It was like it would have been so easy to write the script to hate the guy.
Yes.
And have Eastwood have a reason to hate him and take him out. But they flipped it. They wrote it as like, no, he's very similar, but he's white collar, but he trains the same way, and just the mutual respect they had for each other. It was a really good way to go for that film, I thought.
Awesome. A couple other things that he was in. One was Red Dawn, and another which was Hell Comes to Frogtown. I don't know if you've seen this one, Chris.
I missed Hell Comes to Frogtown. I'm sad to say.
Yeah, I think Joe Bob showed it on his show. It's kind of like a mix of Mad Max and HR Puffin stuff.
Oh my God.
So if you can imagine that. Not only was he this big macho strong guy, friendly guy, brilliant guy, multi-language speaker, he also published a book of poems, The Poetic Work of William Smith. He did this in 2009. Some interesting work. You should definitely check it out. And unfortunately, Mr. Smith died at the Motion Picture and Television Country House and Hospital in Los Angeles on July 5th, 2021, at the age of 88. So really just a recent loss of him. And I remember when it happened. I follow him on Facebook, and his wife now keeps up, his memory on Facebook. So folks could go over and check that out. Did you have anything else you wanted to tell about William Smith, Chris?
No, I thought it was really kind of serendipitous, and I hate that word, but how we both came at it, that this was a guy we both had an appreciation for as an actor, but it's something that just doesn't come up in conversation. Yet randomly, you brought it up. I think, you ever hear of William Smith? Like, oh yes, I've heard of William Smith, and I just like, and we both really liked this guy. Yet neither of us knew, of this, and we both knew his credits. And you remembered Rich Man, Poor Man. I remembered Hawaii 5-0, and just and it was just so interesting to see how we both came at William Smith as an actor from different perspectives, but yet both of us had the same appreciation, I would say, for him.
I agree. So William Smith is today's That Guy in That Show.
He's that guy, He's that guy in that show. That guy